I understand we're moving on to verbal phrases. The very first thing we need to talk about is what a verbal phrase is. We're going to talk about three different types over the course of the week. Participles, gerunds, and infinitives. They're all verbals. A verbal means it's going to be a phrase that begins with a word that we would normally call a verb, but in the case of this particular sentence, that verb is acting differently. So for example, we would say to a freshman, is the word run a verb or a noun? And they would tell us it was a verb. But if I said to them, running is my favorite type of exercise, is the verb in that sentence, running is the subject, so it must be acting as a noun. So what do we call that? That's a different type of verbal phrase. Today, our goal is to understand and identify participial phrases. These are verbal phrases, so words that would normally be a verb, that are instead acting as adjectives. There are two different types. Past participial phrases are verbal forms that are conjugated into the past tense. So usually they'll end in D or ED, but because we have some irregularly formed verbs in the English language, they could end in another form. Like instead of take, it would be taken. So a past participial would be normally D or ED, but sometimes an irregular ending. A present participial will always end in ing, taking, for example. And then the verbal phrase will begin with that verb form, the verb take or taking, and include whatever it's modifying. So if we have taking the bus is part of the verbal phrase. You have to include the base verb and any word that correlates to it. That entire piece is your participial phrase. It will always act as an adjective, which means it can be taken out of the sentence because single word adjectives can be taken out of the sentence. And that'll be important when we try to distinguish between participles and gerunds with the next video. Let's take a look at a few examples.
Participles can be kind of tricky. We have to make sure that we don't choose the true verb. So I suggest that you find the subject and the verb in the sentence first. The photo is the subject. Well, what did the photo do? It won an award. So won is not a part of the participial. Now I can look for another word in the sentence that could be a verb, but is here not acting as a verb. Taken would be my base participial. It includes the prepositional phrase by my father, since that's describing taken. So it's all together as the prepositional phrase, and that participial phrase is describing photo. For the second example, noticing that his friends had left, Sam packed up his work. Sam is my subject. What did Sam do? He packed up, okay? So that's not the participial. Where's the other verb in the sentence? Noticing. Noticing what? Noticing that his friends had left is the entire phrase, and it's describing Sam. In this last example, I is my subject. I have a compound verb with slipped and fell. Where's another verb in the sentence? Running. Running where? It's going to include the prepositional phrase on the ice. So the entire participial phrase would be running on the ice, and it's describing I.